Hello, everyone. This is James Song here. Nice to see you again. Welcome back to my video. Today, we have listening lesson for the TOEFL test. So let's get started right away. So there's nothing on the screen, just empty page for me to write notes today because we are covering listening section. As you probably know, listening section of TOEFL test, you cannot see the questions that you need to answer before listening to your listening passage first. So listening passage will be played and questions will not be given to you. So you can try to write notes, or you can just concentrate listening to the listening passage and remember. And after the listening passage is finished, only then questions will appear on the screen one by one, and you can answer the questions by using your notes and lock in the answer and click next question to solve questions per passage, okay? So let's listen to the passage and make some notes. So today we are covering conversation part of the TOEFL listening test. Here we go. I suggest you write notes with me, obviously, to check your skills and do a note-taking practice, and you can check and compare your notes with mine. So let's do some note-taking. Here we go.
Listen to a conversation between a student and a library employee.
Excuse me, I received a letter that I'm supposed to return a book that I checked out back in September. It's called Modern Social Problems. But I'm writing my senior thesis, so I thought I was allowed to keep the book for the whole academic year.
So you signed up for extended borrowing privileges?
Yeah.
And we're still asking you to bring the book back?
Uh-huh. Do I really have to?
Well, let me check the computer. The title was Modern Social Problems?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, it's been recalled. You can keep it all year as long as no one else requests it, but someone else has. It looks like one of the professors in the sociology department, so you have to bring it back. You can check it out again when it's returned in a couple of weeks.
Well, what if the person renews it, and I really need it right now?
All of it? Or is there a certain section or chapter you're working with?
Well, there's one chapter in particular I'm working with, but why?
Well, we normally don't do this, but because of the circumstances, we can photocopy up to one chapter of the book for you. Why don't you do that for the one you're working with right now? And by the time you need the rest of the book, maybe it'll have been returned.
Oh, that would be great.
Do you have it with you?
No, it's in my dorm room. These are books I want to check out today. Is it okay if I bring that by in a couple days?
Actually, the due date is tomorrow. After that, there will be a $2 per day fine. But you need to return it today if you want to check out any books today. That's our policy.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, not a lot of people realize that. In fact, every semester we get a few students who have had their borrowing privileges suspended completely because they haven't returned books. They're allowed to use books only in the library. They're not allowed to check anything out because of unreturned books.
That's not good. I guess I should head back down to the dorm right now.
But before you go, what you should do is fill out a form requesting the book back in 2 weeks. Then the person who requested it won't be able to renew it, and you'll get it back quickly.
I'll do that right now.
Okay, how did you go? Did you catch everything? You've got everything down that you wanted? You understood everything? You listened? Okay, let me help you. Let's go through it. So let's review and interpret my notes, okay? And by doing that, we will go through the whole passage in detail. So I can help you understand everything you heard, okay? All right, so students comes into the library and asks, do I have to return this book? It's title of the book. You don't have to remember. But he says he's asking whether he has to return the book because he thought he could keep it because he's using it for writing a thesis. He's writing, so he thought he could keep it until the end of this semester. So what does the librarian asks him? To have extended borrowing privileges. So basically, you just need to understand the meaning. So librarian is asking back, are you allowed to keep the book for a long time? And the man says, yes, I'm on extended borrowing privileges. And librarian double check, are we still asking you to bring it back? And student says, yes. So librarian says, let me check. And basically, you have to accept that you cannot write everything down. You just need to write the important details down so that you can remember and understand the whole passage and help you remember what you listened. And also you have to understand as you improve, if you understood, then even if you don't write everything down, you will be able to remember better, okay? So I guess biggest training you have to do with me while studying with me to improve your TOEFL skills, you have to improve your listening note-taking skills. So note-take a little faster, more efficiently, but also understand what you need to write down and what you don't have to write down at all because it's very minor, and what things you just have to work on to remember without writing it down. So librarian basically says, but if a person requests the book or recalled, then you have to bring it back, right? And it's recalled by professor, sociology professor. So librarian is saying, yes, you have to bring this book back. All right, so students is worried now, okay? Students ask back, what if the person renew the book? Renew means after first time of the borrowing period, they are trying to keep the book. So renew borrowing, right? So, student is worried, what if I cannot get the book back, right? And I need it right now to write thesis. And librarian says, do you need all of it? And student says, I'm working on one chapter right now. Then librarian says, we don't usually do this, but we can photocopy up to one chapter for you. So you can use that. And after 2 weeks, hopefully you can get the book back, right? So student says it's great. So librarian just asked, do you have a book with you, right? And the student says it's in my dorm room. And he has some new books he wants to check out right there. So he asks, can I check out these new books and bring the book back later? This book that he has to bring back. Can I check out some more new books now and bring this book that he has to return later? And the librarian basically says no by saying, it's actually due tomorrow. And after that, it will be $2 fines. And librarian says, you cannot check out these new books if you don't return the book that you have to return today. So basically, she's saying you have to return the book first to check out new books. And this is a prime example of you need to realize that you cannot write everything down, and you should be okay with it because you are working hard to understand the passage and only write down the important part. Because the librarian says a few students have lost their borrowing privileges. If you're trying to do a dictation of those words, you'll never be able to write everything down, and you lose the next part, and you'll snowball, and it will become a disaster, okay? So what librarian is basically saying is you cannot borrow unless you have to return first. So return the book that you have first. You take it out first. So if you don't return the books you have, you cannot borrow, you cannot check out new books, and you just have to use the books in the library. So the man says, I better, get those books from the dorm now. So I better go to the dorm now, meaning get that book that he had to return. And also he needs to bring the book back to get the photocopy of one chapter. And also he needs to bring this book back to check out some new books, right? So when he says, I better go to the dorm now, it means he better get the book and return it now, today, okay? And the librarian very kindly offers some more help, some more service by asking him to fill out a form to request the book back in 2 weeks. So the person who borrows the book that he needs tomorrow cannot renew the book, meaning the person who borrowed this book that he needs has to return the books in 2 weeks. Has to, no choice. Meaning he can definitely get the books in 2 weeks' time, right? So librarian offer this service to the man and ask him to fill out a form, and he says, will do, right? So there you have it. How good is it? We basically covered the whole passage perfectly, right? So doing the question would be easy, as you will see. So now the TOEFL test will show you the questions that you need to solve one by one. So let's look at the questions. Why does the man go to the woman, the librarian? What's the reason? What's the reason man goes to talk to the librarian? A, to find out if he can get extended borrowing privileges. This is not true, because when the librarian asks, are you on extended borrowing privileges? The man says yes. So the man believes he is already on extended borrowing privileges. So he didn't go to the library to find out if he can get it. So if you chose A, basically you have chosen, the man went to the library to ask, can I get the extended borrowing privileges? That's A's answer. And it's not, because he says he's already on the extended borrowing privileges. B, to find out if he needs to immediately return a book he borrowed. Yeah, I mean, immediately, maybe a little bit questionable. So we'll look at C and D, but immediately can mean within 1 day. That could be kind of immediate, not within a month or within 2 weeks, okay? So B could still be right. And if you take out immediately, B is the perfect answer. So I'll keep B. C, to find out why he has to pay a library fine. This is not true, because if C is correct, basically you have chosen the man wants to ask and receive some explanation from the librarian that what's the reason I have to pay the fine. So that's totally off topic. D, to find out why his borrowing privileges have been suspended. Wow, very tricky. So D is saying, I'm on borrowing privileges, so I can keep the book, but why do I have to return it? Some student may interpret this answer choice like that, but that's not really true, because a student is asking whether I have to return this book that I thought I could keep, right? And the librarian asks, are you on extended borrowing privileges? He says yes, but librarian explains, even implies, even if you are on extended borrowing privileges, if somebody requests this book or recall this book, then you have to return it. So that's why librarian says you have to return the book. Okay, so that's why B is the answer, not D. Because B is saying the man goes to the library to ask, do I have to return this book? Okay, although blah, 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 blah. That's B. D is saying, I'm on borrowing privileges, but why am I not on borrowing privileges anymore? Explain to me. That's D. Okay, that's the difference. So D is asking the librarian to explain to me why I am not on borrowing privileges. But that's not true because he is on extended borrowing privileges, but he still has to bring the book back because somebody requested it. So that's why D is not the answer. Yeah, tricky question. So question 1, B. Okay, question 2, moving on. What will the man probably do today? Okay, before looking at the answer choice, we know he will go to the dorm and get the book that he needs to return and return that book and get the photocopies and check out new books he wanted, maybe, and fill out the form to get the book back in 2 weeks. That's what he will do based on what we listened, okay? So let's go. A, get photocopies of a book chapter. Yeah, maybe, right? As long as he brings the book back, and whether he can do it or librarian does it for him, that get the photocopies within today. But the librarian asks him, do you have the book with you? Meaning, you know, she can or he can get the photocopy right now, right? So A looks very likely. B, find out who requested his book. He already knows. And that's irrelevant. It's not something he'll do today. Librarian already told him that it is requested by sociology professor. So B is out. C, borrow additional books. Maybe, because he said, I want to check out these books and can I bring the book back a little bit later? Actually, he says in a couple of days. Couple of days means, 2 days or 2-3 days, okay? Or even in a few days, it implies. But technically, a couple of days, a couple is 2. So, it implies 2 days, but, it actually means in a few days, right? So he actually wanted to get the new books checked out, right? But the librarian says, no, you have to return the books and then check out the books. So if he goes to the dorm and get that book and return that book and try to get a photocopy, then he is able to check out new books he wanted, right? So C is very likely. Okay. D, renew the book on modern social problems. He cannot, right? He has to return it because sociology professor will use it, right? And then will return the book in 2 weeks for him to hopefully get the book back in 2 weeks, right? So he needs to return it, not renew. He cannot renew, okay? Yeah, so answer is A and C. So question 2, answer is A and C. All right, moving on to question 3. What is the woman trying to explain when she mentions students who have lost their borrowing privileges? So it's this story here, right? Although we didn't write down word for word because we cannot, we won't be able to follow the whole passage, but we understood, right? The librarian tells a story about some students lose their borrowing privileges altogether. So meaning cannot check out the books because they did not return the book. So basically the important detail here is you need to return the book to get the books out. So if you want to borrow, you need to return. You do not return the books, you cannot borrow the books out, right? So that is what woman is trying to explain to the man, okay? So why the man should not photocopy, it has nothing to do with whether photocopy or not, okay? So B, the reasons of one of the library's policy, it's not the reason, it's explaining the policy itself, right? So, you know, the reasons for one of the library policy, if you chose B, you've chosen the answer that is something like, we have the policy that you have to return the book in order to check out new books. And the reason we have this policy is because we lost too many books in the library. So that's the reason. So we are not talking about the reason, okay? We're just talking about the policy, what you need to do to borrow the books. You have to return it first. C, what will happen if the man does not return the book? Yeah, possibly, because he wanted to check out new books and librarian says, oh, no, hold on, you cannot because you have to return the book first. So librarian, who is woman in this passage, is trying to explain to him what will happen to him if he does not return the book first. What will happen to him? What will happen? He will not be able to check out new books. So C looks very strong. D, the reason, it's not explaining the reason. The reason the man has to fill out a form, that's irrelevant. It's a good information, and it's even in the listening passage. However, this is not answering the question, okay? So question is about this part, okay? Not this part, is asking this part. So D has nothing to do with it. So question 3, the answer is C. Question 4, how does the man probably feel at the end of the conversation? Let's look at the answer choices. I'm a little bit lost what is the question referring to, implying. Okay, let's look at answer choices. Annoyed that, I don't think he's annoyed, okay? He's like, okay with it because he knows he can get the book in 2 weeks, and within 2 weeks, he can just get the photocopy of one chapter and use that chapter to work on his thesis, right? So I don't think he's annoyed. Annoyed that he has to pay a fine, irrelevant. Moving on. B, upset. I don't think he's upset. Upset that he's losing his library privileges. He's not losing his library privileges at all. There's no privileges he's losing, okay? He can keep check out new books as long as he can return the book first or returns the book. And he is still on extended borrowing privileges. But even if he's on that privilege, if somebody requests the specific book, then he has to bring it back. So he's not losing any library privileges at all, right? So B is wrong. C, glad that, so kind of happy. I don't think it's like overly joyed, happy, but glad that he can keep the book for 2 more weeks. He cannot. Okay, he can get the book back if he fills out the form in 2 weeks. He can get the book back in 2 weeks, but he cannot keep the book. He has to return it. So D should be the answer. Let's check. Less worried about having to return the book. This is exactly right. Right? Because at first, he was a little annoyed or worried, right? He's like, I need it now. I need the book now, right? I need to, can I change color here? Yes, I can. So, you know, I need it now to write the thesis, right? What if the man who borrows renew it? You know, I'm in trouble. I need the book as soon as possible. I need it right. I need it now. But librarian offers to photocopy up to 1 chapter. And the man says, great. Okay, because he says he is working on 1 chapter right now, right? And if he fills out the form, he can get the book back in 2 weeks, right? So the attitude must have changed, right? So he's very worried to less worried because he can use the photocopy and he can get the book back in 2 weeks. So D is perfect. D is perfect. So question 4, the answer is D. All right, moving on to question 5. Why does the woman say this? So we need to listen to the question file. Let's listen.
Why does the woman say this?
And we're still asking you to bring the book back?
Okay, that's the question. So what does woman says? So we are still asking for the book back, right? Okay, so if you remember, if you look at the notes, where was this part said, right? The woman asked back to, when student asked, do I have to return this book? I thought I could keep it. Librarian says, are you on extended borrowing privileges? The man says, yes. And after that, the librarian asked, so are we still asking the book back, right? So are we still asking the book back? So it's a confirmation question. So, okay, so if you are on extended borrowing privileges, I got that. But is the library still, although you are on extended borrowing privileges, are we still asking the book back? Okay, so just to make sure what the situation is, okay? So let's look at the answer choices. A, to make sure, confirm, she understands what the man's problem is. Yeah, exactly, right? So are we still, so your problem is you thought you could keep this book because you're on extended borrowing privileges, but are we still asking the book back? Is that right? Is that right? Is this the problem for you? Right? So A looks perfect to me. Let's check B, to encourage the man to return the book to library soon. This is a funny one, right? So basically, if you chose B, you are saying like, the woman says, are we still asking the book back? Means like, come on, do the right thing, return the book as soon as possible. Irrelevant. Check whether the man has already returned the book. Makes no sense. So if you chose C, basically you're saying, the woman's saying, so you returned the book or not? Have you already returned it or not yet? So C is irrelevant. D, to see if the man is familiar with the library policy. This is ridiculous. So yeah, she's just trying to confirm, make sure this is the situation right now, right? Yeah. So question 5, the answer is A. Okay, so that's it for this passage, this listening passage and its lesson. It's a conversation passage, so there are only 5 questions. And you'll see in my listening lecture passage that is consists of lecture, not conversation. There are 6 questions, okay? So I hope you learn something valuable, and let's keep going. So that's it for this conversation listening passage lesson, and I'll come back with some new listening lecture. Thanks for watching. Bye for now. Hello everyone, this is James Song here. Nice to see you. Thank you for watching my video. We have another edition of listening lesson of the TOEFL test, and we're covering a lecture passage. So obviously it's a little longer and harder than the conversation part. So we'll play the listening passage first, write notes on them, and then we'll go through the questions in this section one by one. So it would be a great idea if you join me writing notes with me, and then you can compare your notes to mine while going through the solving questions. So without further ado, let's listen to the passage and do some note-taking. Here we go.
Listen to part of a lecture in a linguistics class.
Okay, the conventions or assumptions that govern conversation, these may vary from one culture to another, but basically, for people to communicate, they have to follow certain rules. Like, if I'm talking with you and I start saying things that are not true, if you can't tell when I'm lying and when I'm telling the truth, well, we're not going to have a very satisfactory conversation, are we? Why? Because it violates one of the Gricean maxims. That's a set of rules, or maxims, a philosopher named H.P. Grice came up with in the 1970s. One of these Gricean maxims is, well, I've already given you a hint.
Oh, you just can't go around telling lies.
Right, or as Grice put it, do not say what you believe to be false. That's one of Grice's maxims of quality, as he called it. So that's pretty obvious. But there are others just as important. Like, suppose you were to ask me what time it was and I replied, my sister just got married. What would you think?
You're not really answering my question.
No, I'm not, am I? There's no connection at all, which feels wrong because you generally expect to find one. So one important maxim is simply be relevant. And using this so-called maxim of relevance, we can infer things as well. Or rather, the speaker can imply things and the listener can make inferences. For instance, suppose you say you'd really love to have a cup of coffee right now, and I say, there's a shop around the corner. Now, what can you infer from what I said?
Well, that the shop sells coffee, for one thing.
Right, and that I believe it's open now. Because if I weren't implying those things, my response would not be relevant. It'd have no connection with what you said before. But, according to the maxim, my response should be relevant to your statement, meaning we should assume some connection between the statement and the response. And this maxim of relevance is quite efficient to use. Even if I don't spell out all the details, you can still make some useful logical inferences, namely, the shop is open and it sells coffee. If we actually had to explain all these details, conversations would move along pretty slowly, wouldn't they? Okay, then there's the maxims of manner, including things like be clear and avoid ambiguity. And another, more interesting maxim is one of the so-called maxims of quantity of information, that is. It says to give as much information as is required in the situation. So, suppose you ask me what I did yesterday, and I say, I went to the art museum. You would likely infer that I saw some works of art. Suppose, though, that I did not go inside the museum. I just walked up to it, then left. Then I violated the quantity maxim by not giving enough information. So you can see how important implications are to our ability to carry on a conversation. But there are times when people will violate these maxims on purpose. Let's say a boss is asked to write a letter of recommendation for a former employee seeking an engineering job. The letter he writes is quite brief, something like, Mr. X is polite and always dresses neatly. So what does this really mean?
Oh, I see. By not mentioning any important qualities related to the job, the boss is, like, implying that this is the best that can be said about Mr. X, that he's really not qualified.
Exactly. It's a written letter, not a conversation, but the principle's the same. The boss is conveying a negative impression of Mr. X without actually saying anything negative about him. So, by violating the maxims, it can be a way to be subtle or polite, or to convey humor through sarcasm or irony. Sometimes, though, people will violate maxims for another purpose, to deceive. Now, can you imagine who might do such a thing?
Some politicians?
Or advertisers.
Right. Anyone who may see an advantage in implying certain things that are untrue without explicitly saying something untrue. They think, hey, don't blame us if our audience happens to draw inferences that are simply not true. So, next time you see an advertisement saying some product could be up to 20% more effective, think of these maxims of quantity and relevance and ask yourself what inferences you're being led to draw. Think, more effective than what exactly? And why did they use those little phrases, could be and up to? These claims give us a lot less information than they seem to.
All right. So how did you go? Yeah, sorry about the writing not being very neat, my note. I will try to do a better job next time. Yeah, I mean, my notes aren't usually this bad, but I don't know what happened this time. I was maybe just busy writing it down or something. It's not very neat, but nevertheless, quality of the notes, I'm sure you'll be happy with as I go through these notes with you, for you, okay? So when you having a conversation, right? There are rules. I mean, you don't really need to write this down. If you can remember, when conversations are being carried out, or what governs conversation is there are a set of rules, okay? So this could be your first word for your notes, that's fine, okay? So when you're having conversation, there are certain rules, you know, we have to obey to have a conversation. So you cannot just lie, right? If you're saying things that are untrue, then you're not going to have a very good conversation or effective conversation, because it violates Gricean maxim. You don't have to spell it out, okay? Some kind of maxim, Greek maxim, and when you see the question, you just need to remember the sound of the terminology so that when the question is spelled out for you, then you just need to be able to recognize. That's all it is, okay? I mean, who cares what Gricean maxim is, okay? It's just the contents that we need to understand to answer the questions correctly, right? Okay, so if you say untruthful things, you are violating Gricean maxims. Okay, so Gricean maxims are a set of rules, you know, that you need to keep to have a good conversation. And it's the name of the person, developed in 1970s. Okay, so let's go. So first, Gricean maxims. number one. You can like purposely lie or, saying untruthful things on purpose, okay? And we call this quality, right? It's just the name of maxim, okay? Moving on. Second maxim. So they give you an example, right? And if you think you can remember, and if you don't think it's like important concept, then you don't have to write it down, okay? Basically there was an example like somebody asked you what time it is, then you are saying something completely irrelevant, like, I want to play football. I mean, obviously that was not the example that was mentioned in the listening passage, but the point is, if you understand, then it's fine, right? So example was somebody was not answering the question, okay? So if you don't answer the question, that means there's no connection in conversation, right? So the second maxim is you have to be relevant, okay? First maxim is you should try to say truthful things on purpose, right? And you need to be relevant. That's the second rule, okay, of Gricean maxim. And speakers can imply things and listener can infer things. What does that mean? So if somebody said, I would love some coffee right now, then, you can respond and have a conversation by saying, there's a shop around the corner. Then, the speaker is implying that the shop sells the coffee and it is open right now, to the other person who said, I would love a cup of coffee now. To almost answer the question, you can go to this shop around the corner because you will get the coffee because they sell it and it is open. So you'll get some coffee that you would like to get right now. So that's a conversation, right? So speakers can imply by saying there's a shop around the corner. What this means is if there is no implication, there's no inference, right? There's a shop around the corner, right? If you just understand word for word, what does that mean? This person who said, I would love a cup of coffee right now, would respond without inference, would say, what kind of shop? Is that a coffee shop? Is that a stationery shop? Is that a clothing shop? Is that a restaurant? The conversation will go off topic like this, okay? So that's what the speaker is saying. Speaker is saying, by saying there's a shop around the corner, the speaker is already implying that they sell coffee and it is open, so you can go to not a shop, the shop around the corner that I'm implying to get some coffee, right? And listener need to make the right inferences. Listener need to get it, right? When the speaker said there's a shop around the corner, then listener need to understand, okay, he's saying there's a coffee shop around the corner. Okay? So that's amplification, implying by speaker, and listener also need to make right inferences in conversation, as long as you're relevant, because you need to be relevant to follow the Gricean's maxim, okay? And there was some detail about, you don't need to say everything if you're able to infer, okay? And there was a detail about if everything needed to be explained, then conversation would be very slow, meaning, they'll take too much time. Okay, so you need to be relevant. And if you are relevant, actually you can make right amplification and inferences, right? To have a good conversation. All right, third rule. Manner is a third rule. So you need to be clear and not ambiguous. Ambiguous means like fuzzy, like not clear. Ambiguous means you cannot really understand exactly, okay? It's unclear. So you need to be clear. And number 4 was called quantity, and that is a quantity of information. So you need to have a good quantity of information to have a good conversation according to Gracian's maxim. So you need good amount of information, quantity, as much as it's required in different situations. So based on context, you need to give enough information so that listeners can understand or make right inferences. Okay, right inferences. What does that mean? Okay, so for example, if I said I went to an art museum on the weekend to my friend, the friend may feel that I went inside to the museum and saw some art, right? But if I didn't go inside the art museum, I just walk up to the art museum and left. But if I don't give that information, I just say, I went to an art museum on the weekend, finish, then I'm not giving enough amount of information. So my quantity of information is really lacking and misleading him or leading him to make wrong inferences. So that's violating quantity of information. Okay, if I said I went to an art museum on the weekend, because that could mean I went inside and saw some art, but I didn't. So I have to tell my friend that, but I didn't go inside the museum. I have to say that to help him understand clearly, right? So, however, it's interesting that in some situation, this quantity maxim can be violated, not kept on purpose. In what situation? For example, if the boss is writing a recommendation letter, it could be very brief and say, the person is very polite and dressed well, but does not mention anything about the job function or job or how well he works, like whether he has a communication skills or he works hard or his competencies, right? If the recommendation letter does not have any information about the job, but just, the employee is polite and dresses well, then by violating the quantity maximum purpose, okay, the speaker or writer is implying, okay, to the listener or reader that this employee is not really good at his job. He's not really qualified because it's a recommendation letter, but there's no information, okay? Right? So the writer may write this way on purpose to say this employee is not qualified, okay? So in letter, in writing, in speaking, it's the same, okay? So we're talking about, when you have a conversation, so just a little detail, say writing is the same, okay? As long as you're communicating, okay? So it backs up, okay? What's the result? What's the outcome by violating the quantity maxim? Who writes the letter is negative about this employee. So it's not really recommending this employee without saying it directly or explicitly. Explicitly, as you know, of course, it means like directly upfront, okay? Yeah, so quantity can be violated to be polite or to show sense of humor and a couple other things it mentioned in the listening. Moving on, not important. And next paragraph, right? But perhaps more importantly, right? Quantity maxim is violated on purpose when you want to deceive, when you want to trick someone over, all right? Purposely make someone to not make a false, fail to understand what you're trying to say, okay? Or trick them, okay? False them, right? To deceive, right? Okay. So politician, okay, or advertisement, all right? Okay, so questions being asked by a student in the lecture. And the professor tells them that advertisement or advertiser, so speaker or writer in this case, can purposely imply something that is false to trick the audiences, trick the consumer, without saying untruthful things directly, okay? So what's the example? The advertiser, by violating quantity maxim, the advertiser could say a phrase like, something could be 20% more effective. So what does this mean? Could be is not 100%. So, when you say could be is a positive connotation, so advertiser is wanting the reader or listener of this advertisement to feel that it is 20% more effective. But advertiser can say, I only said could be, could not be, maybe, 50-50. Okay, could be is not definite. So it's purposely misleading the consumers by giving less information, right? Okay, could be, right? So the professor is saying why advertisers would use such phrase like could be or up to trick the customers. And advertisers can still back themselves by saying, I didn't lie, I said could be. Could be means could not be as well, okay? Or up to maximum, but it may not be up to that level. Minimum, I didn't say. So professor in this lecture is trying to tell the student, how advertisers purposely violate the quantity maxim to deceive consumers by using could be or up to, okay? And professor clearly say advertisers are using less information than they seem to, okay? It may seem enough information, but it's not. It's trying to trick the consumers. Okay, so pretty much word for word, right? I think our understanding of this listening passage is perfect. No less than working with the actual script. I explained everything. So let's move on and solve the questions and get every question right. All right, let's look at the questions. Okay, now we understood the passage perfectly. Let's also get all the questions right. All right, so there are 6 questions starting from question number 6. So 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And it starts from question 6 because this is a second passage of the whole one set of TOEFL listening part of the TOEFL test. Okay, so let's start with question 6. What is the main topic of the lecture? So main topic is, it's the overview of the Gricean's maxim, because it covers first maxim, second maxim, third maxim, and fourth maxim. Although, they spend more time in second maxim and fourth maxim, the main topic is definitely describing 4 of Gricean's maxim, right? Okay. So A, the reasons people are not always truthful in conversation. So that's only last paragraph if this was the reading passage, right? So it's not the whole main topic of the lecture. So it's not answering the question. It's only 4th part. It's only one part. Okay, B. The need for greater regulation of language used in advertising. Also, only one part. And this is actually wrong information. Okay, this, you could argue this is implied, right? But this is the language test, and this is over inference if you think B is right. So it's wrong in 2 different ways. First, it's not the main topic of the whole passage, and also there was never actually information about need for greater regulation explicitly stated in the passage. So this kind of answer choice will always be wrong because it will be over inference. Okay. Answer choice C, the need for maximum precision and detail in everyday conversation. Yeah, I mean, very kind of vague, tricky answer choice. C kind of seems right, but it's not talking about the need. That's not the whole like main idea of the passage. Main idea is there is need. So these are some rules, right? Rule number 1, rule number 2, rule number 3, rule number 4. That's the main topic, okay? So C does not answer the question, right? It does not answer this question. So main topic, the role of certain rules, yeah. So rule number 1, the function, number 2, number 3, number 4. Okay, so certain rules here refers to Gricean's maxim, 1, 2, 3, 4, in determining what a speaker means. Exactly, right? It talks about when you have a conversation, how does it make effective conversation? By following these rules when you are communicating with someone. And the focus is the speaker or writer to do the right things, okay? Don't say untruthful things. Speak relevant way, be clear, and give enough information, okay? So question 6, D. All right, let's move on to question 7. Question 7, according to the professor, what helps speakers keep conversation from proceeding too slowly? So this was kind of a detail, but not minor detail. So I have written it down in my notes, but some of you may not have written it down, but remember, or this is type of question that you learn, although it's a detail, it's not a minor detail. So you need to kind of understand it and remember, or actually write it down, okay? So here, second maxim, you need to be relevant, and speakers need to imply, can imply, and listeners, because speaker is relevant to the topic, listeners need to be able to make right inferences, right? So I would love a cup of coffee right now, and the person could say, there's a shop around the corner. So conversation is done, okay? This person would go to this shop and get some coffee. But here in the note, right? The lecturer in the listening passage said, if everything needs to be explained, then conversation could become very slow, meaning conversation would become too long, right? So this is the right note-taking area for question 7. Okay. So let's pick the right answer. What helps speakers keep conversation from proceeding too slowly? The speakers need to make a good amplification, right? The ability to make inferences according to, yeah, okay. So you need to make inferences, right? Correctly though. So A looks really good. B, the ability to effectively distinguish truth from falsehood. It has nothing to do with true and false. It's not answering the question, okay? The answer should be making and giving right inferences, okay? C, the willingness to acknowledge that a Gricean maxim has been violated. So you have to be willing, open enough to accept that Gricean maxim has been violated. What? I cannot even comprehend this sentence correctly to answer this question. It's totally irrelevant. Okay, it's actually violating Gricean's maxim, although it's not a conversation. C is not relevant to the question at all. D, the willingness to ignore Gricean maxim. Okay, so sometimes let's just ignore it. Forget it. Don't worry about Gricean maxim. Just don't be relevant. Be irrelevant sometimes. Let's do that. Terrible answer. Right? So question 7, the right answer is A. All right, moving on to question 8. Looks pretty heavy. It's a whole table. So let's look at question 8. For each of the following, indicate whether or not it reflects one of Gricean's maxims. See, when you see this, so my note-taking was like this, right? Okay, GM, right? And you just need to be able to match the terminology, exact spelling the question gives you, then you're doing your job, right? It reflects, so whether or not it reflects one of Gricean maxims, professor mentioned. So something is a maxim, something is not, like irrelevant or wrong. And some answer choices are actually one of the Gricean's maxim. Let's go. Try to make the topic interesting. Has the listening talked about one of the rules is to make topic more interesting? Actually not, right? Not directly, at least. Like, try to make topic interesting is not one of the maxim. Avoid making claims that are false. That's the first one, right? Right? Make sure you don't say untruthful things on purpose. You try to say things that are true. At least you try, okay? So you avoid making claims that are false. So that's maxim, the first one. Quality. Make comment as informative as necessary. Yeah, that's the quantity of info. So this one here. As much information as required in situations. So based in context, you need to give as much information, not too much information, but necessary amount of information for listeners to understand correctly. Okay. So that's rule number 4. Quantity. Qual. Quan. All right. Make as few assumptions as possible. There's no such rule. Okay. Assumption is a little bit different to inferences, but you know, even you consider assumption as like kind of or part of inferences, there's no maxim of make as less inference or implication as possible. It's simply not not a part of maxim. Okay, if anything, you need to write, you need to make right kind and right amount of inferences. Okay, assumptions according to rule number 2. Okay, so last one, make comments relate to previous statement. Yeah, you need to answer the question in conversation. So you need to be relevant. So that's rule number 2. Okay, so it's here. If somebody asks time, you know, you have to answer what time it is. Okay, don't say something completely irrelevant or not connected. Okay, so I think we did perfect job for question number 8. So question number 8, first one is not a maxim, second is maxim, third is maxim, fourth one is not a maxim, and final and fifth one is a maxim. Okay, so these are the answers for question 8. All right, moving on to question 9. Why does the professor, okay, why? What's the reason? Does the professor describe a letter of recommendation? Okay, so without looking at the answer choice, it's a rhetorical purpose question. So if you understood the question and the contents, you should be able to kind of answer it without looking at the answer choices. So let's try to answer this. The reason why professor described letter of recommendation is what? Because it's an example of when quantity maxim is violated on purpose. Okay, see, notes here, right? When quantity maxim is violated on purpose for good reasons, I guess. You know, the boss doesn't want to say negative things about this person. So, you know, the boss imply negative things about this person without actually explicitly or directly saying negative things, right? So these 3 parts of the note will help you. Okay, answer choices. A, to point out differences between written statement and spoken statement. This is wrong. And also actually the listening says, although it's letter, it's the same, whether it's written or spoken situation. Okay. See here, right? So A is wrong. B, to illustrate how people may be deceived in a business environment. I wouldn't say deceived. That's more advert, the last one, right? So the purpose is not to deceive, but be not explicit, right? Or be polite, right? Okay, so deceive is here, and deceive is related to the advertisers, not this person who wrote a recommendation letter. Okay, it's violated the quantity maxim on purpose to maybe be polite or discreet. Okay, so I think B is a bit too much. To show how violating maxim may contribute to a statement's meaning. Yeah. Okay, so what was the statement? he's very polite and dresses well. So what does that mean? So statement is the employee is polite and dresses well. But what does it mean? Because this statement does not include enough information about the job or his ability to do the job, okay? Although he didn't say he's not qualified, by only saying, what is the statement? He's a polite and dresses well, and that's it, no more information. Violating maxim can imply different meaning of this statement, okay? The statement of he's very polite and dresses well means he's not qualified for the job. He you know, he's not good enough in doing his job, right? Yeah, so very good question, okay? D, to prove that lying is sometimes considered acceptable. White lies, okay? He is polite and dresses well. Is that a lie? Is that a white lie? No. All right, so question 9, the answer is C. Okay, let's keep on moving. Second last question for this section of the listening test. Question 10 and question 11, and we're done. So question 10, what does the professor imply about advertisers? They are beep, beep. They are beep. Okay, sorry. Advertisers purposely trick people, purposely not give enough information, and try to trick consumers to make false decision, maybe. Okay. All right, let's find out the answer by reading the answer choices. They are less likely than politicians. There's no direct comparison of advertisers and politicians in this passage. Who are worse or okay? Yeah, it's not mentioned this way. There was no direct comparison. Who is worse or who did what? Okay, it was just a group. Maybe politicians and advertisers do these things, and professors in the listening focuses on advertisers only. So A is wrong. B, they realize that consumers know whether an advertiser violates a maxim. This is a thing. This is the whole thing, right? Advertiser, they're trying at least, they're violating a maxim, but trying very hard for consumer to not know about their intention, right? To trick them, okay? So B is opposite, okay? B is saying advertisers realize that consumers know what they're doing, what advertisers are doing, or how or whether advertisement violate a maxim. That's opposite, okay? Advertisers realize that consumer may not know whether advertisement violate a maxim. That's the right answer, okay? So this is opposite. C, they often make use of Gricean maxims to express humor. That's different section, yeah? Okay, so before moving on to deceiving purpose, they may use it for sense of humor or be polite or whatever. So this is different section. It's before we talk about the advertisers, right? So it's not answering the questions. D, they realize that advertisers, consumers make false influences. Yeah, exactly. right? All right, advertisers realize that consumers may make false, wrong inferences from their advertisement, which violates the Gricean's maxim by saying could be or up to, or they are trying at least. That's what they are trying to achieve, right? So D is the right answer. Clear? So the answer is D. Question 10, D. Okay, here we go.
What type of maxim does the professor illustrate with this example?
For instance, suppose you say you'd really love to have a cup of coffee right now, and I say, there's a shop around the corner.
Okay, so we've done this many times. So this example from the notes is in the section of be relevant. Maxim, second maxim, Gricean maxim, so be relevant. And also, I mean, you should have spotted from your note-taking, you know, look back in your notes and it's right here. I would love a cup of coffee right now. But, you know, even you couldn't automatically go back to your notes and remember your notes. If you just listen, I would love a cup of coffee. Then the answer was there's a shop around the corner, right? So that's, you need to answer the question. So it's a matter of being relevant and giving relevant answer to the questions being asked. So question 11, D. That's it, guys. So another section done. TOEFL listening, lecture, passage. So I'll see you again in the next video. Thank you for watching. I really appreciate it. Bye for now and see you soon. Hi guys, this is James here. We are doing another listening passage. It's a lecture passage about environmental science. So without further ado, let's get started. So I'll play the listening passage and write notes first. Here we go.
Listen to part of a lecture in an environmental science class.
I'd like to take you back about 11,000 years ago when Earth entered the latest interglacial period. Interglacial periods are typically periods of time between ice ages, when the climate warms and the glacial ice retreats for a time before things cool off again and another ice age begins. And for over the past several million years, Earth's sort of default climate has actually been ice age. But we have experienced periodic regular thaws, and the last one, the one we're in now, started about 11,000 years ago. Now, the typical pattern for an interglacial period, and we've studied several, is that the concentration of carbon dioxide and methane gas actually reaches its peak. That is, there's the most carbon dioxide and methane gas, greenhouse gases, in the atmosphere just after the beginning of the interglacial period. And then, for reasons which are not entirely clear, the concentration of greenhouse gases gradually goes down. Now, the climate continues to warm for a while because there is a lag effect. But gradually, as the concentration of greenhouse gases goes down, Earth starts to cool again, and eventually you slip back into an ice age. However, for the latest interglacial period, the one we're in now, this pattern did not hold. That is, the concentration of carbon dioxide and methane dipped a little bit after peaking at the beginning, near the beginning of the interglacial period, but then it began to rise again. What was different about this interglacial period than the other ones? Well, one of the big differences is human activity. People began to raise crops and animals for food, instead of hunting for them. This is the agricultural revolution, and it began to happen in the earliest stages about 11,000 years ago. Now, scientists have tended to regard the agricultural revolution as a beneficiary of the fortuitous shift in climate. However, some new theories of climate, new theorists of climate, have proposed that perhaps humanity was having an effect on the climate as far back as the beginnings of the agricultural revolution. When you grow crops and pasture your animals, one of the things you do is you cut down the forests. If you cut down the forests, when you burn the trees for fuel and don't replace them with other trees, or when you just leave them to rot and don't allow other trees to grow, you end up with a lot more carbon in the form of carbon dioxide getting into the atmosphere. Another gas associated with the spread of agriculture is methane. Methane forms in large concentrations above wetlands. And as it turns out, the cultivation of certain grains creates vast areas of artificial wetlands and probably drastically increases the amount of methane getting into the atmosphere over and above what would be there. So agriculture, the spread of agriculture, we're talking over thousands of years. But this could very well have had a profound effect on the composition of Earth's atmosphere. It's kind of ironic to think that absent that effect, it may be that we would be heading into an ice age again. In fact, back in the 1970s, a lot of theorists were predicting that, the climate would start to cool and we'd slowly enter into a new ice age. And then they were puzzled as to why it didn't seem to be happening. Now, what are the implications for the future? Well, it's a little tricky. I mean, you could say, well, here's an example of human activity, the agricultural revolution, which actually was beneficial. We altered the climate for the better, perhaps by preventing an ice age. But then industrialization, of course, has drastically increased the amount of carbon dioxide that humans are putting into the atmosphere. The burning of fossil fuels tends to put a lot of CO2 into the atmosphere. So we're entering into uncharted territory now in terms of the amount of carbon dioxide, the concentrations of carbon dioxide that are now being put into the atmosphere as a result of industrialization and the use of fossil fuels.
Okay, how did you go? So I'm pretty confident about my notes. I think it's pretty comprehensive. So let me go through this with you and for you, and let's understand completely what the listening passage was about by reviewing and understanding my notes, okay? So 11,000 years ago, it was latest interglacial period, okay? All right, so I think it's interglacial ice age period, okay? In between ice age, okay? So in the listening, I wrote down real time. Interglacial period means between ice age, right? So ice age is supposed to be ice age, so everything's frozen, I guess. So interglacial period is between ice age, where climates are warm enough for, like humans and animals to thrive, live, I guess, okay? So latest interglacial period, obviously I'm alive. You are too. So we are in interglacial period. We are not in ice age. So we are in the middle of latest interglacial period from 11,000 years ago, okay? So usually during interglacial period, there's a pattern, right? So CO2, carbon dioxide, and methane gas peak, so reach the maximum, the highest, at the beginning of interglacial period. okay, when it just first starts. And then gas gradually comes down, the amount, okay? But it's still warm for a while, interglacial. So it's still warm for a little while, but gradually cools down to reach ice age. So that's at the end of interglacial period because it enters ice age ultimately, right? Okay. But the latest interglacial period, which we are in right now, from 11 years ago to right at this moment, thank God, we are not in ice age. The latest interglacial period does not follow the pattern, like usual pattern of interglacial period. So CO2 and methane dropped a little bit. It says it reaches the peak at the beginning of the interglacial period, but it gradually goes down. So CO2 and methane went down a bit, but it's not going down permanently. It's kind of rising again, which is different to usual pattern. Okay? All right? So why it's different? Why? Why the pattern is different for latest interglacial period only? Let's find out. The reason is humans start raising crops and animals rather than hunting them. So agricultural revolution started around 11,000 years ago. Surprise, surprise. So 11,000 years ago means start of interglacial period that we are in now. So agricultural revolution started roughly around beginning of interglacial period. Okay, so what has agricultural revolution? So becoming a farmer and raising animals rather than hunting them has anything to do with it. Okay, so at first agricultural revolution seemed to be like a beneficiary of changing climate. Beneficiary means a party, a group, a person, or a thing that receives the benefits because of some outcome. So, at first, many people thought agricultural revolution was like a result of changing in climate, okay? But new theory says human affected the climate, meaning agricultural revolution is not the beneficiary, it's not the result, outcome, but actually cause. So human action, agricultural revolution, is cause of changing in climate, okay? Affected the climate change, which in this context, specifically, CO2, carbon dioxide and methane rising again, and the temperature not cooling down, okay? Right? So why is that? Like humans cut down forest, and if forests are not replaced, so they don't plant the trees to fill up the forest they have cut down, then if there are not enough forest, then that causes more CO2, increase in amount of CO2. Second reason. Methane gas. So when farming, methane gas increases in amount, more methane gas in wetland, but in cultivating certain crop by doing agricultural, by doing agriculture, it creates a lot of artificial, means man-made, okay, not natural. So it created additional wetlands, okay? So more wetlands, more methane gas. So man made more wetlands by doing agriculture, so more methane gas. Very important detail, these two. It's like a body paragraph, okay? So first they cut down forest and it's not replaced, so more carbon dioxide. Second, due to agriculture, I guess, certain crops require more wetlands, so human created more wetlands, so there are a lot more methane gas. Now we know why, more carbon dioxide and more methane gas. So this is one of the hypotheses, right? This maybe, this is why it's happening this way. Next paragraph. So yeah, so this is why we are not entering towards ice age, right? So in 1970s, people said it's going to cool down again to gradually enter ice age, but it said CO2 and methane is rising again. So now it's implying we are not cooling down. Okay, we expect it to cool down to eventually gradually go towards ice age, but we are not. So it's like getting warmed up again. Okay, temperature is not really decreasing, not really going down. So what's going to happen in the future is tricky, hard to know. We don't know. So, for human, changing climate, if it was caused by agriculture, maybe it's a good thing because, we survive, right? We are not entering ice age. We are not going to freeze to death. However, industrialization, so basically factory, entering into manufacturing era from agricultural era, so building factories and making things, producing things, it further increased carbon dioxide, as we all know, and burning of a lot of fossil fuels, coals and oil, petroleum, right? Gasoline, increase carbon dioxide also, right? So in the future, we really do not know what's going to happen in terms of interglacial period, but it's implying that maybe, continuation of burning fossil fuels and industrialization, perhaps carbon dioxide will continue to rise in the future based on the context, based on the contents it has mentioned. But the fact, the lecturer in the passage, professor, makes it very clear that we are not sure what's going to happen. Okay, we are not sure. Okay, but this is what is happened and happening, right now. Okay, so that's it. That's pretty comprehensive, right? So I think we're ready to tackle questions and get every question right. So let's look at the question. Okay, as usual, we have 6 questions in this section, 1 lecture passage section. So we are continuing the TOEFL listening set. So the 6 questions from question 12. So 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 we'll look at, okay? So question 12, what is the lecture mainly about? The effect of ice ages on the development of agriculture. So this is certainly true, but it's one part, okay? So we are looking for the whole lecture, okay, main idea of the whole lecture, not just one specific paragraphs, if it was a reading passage. So the effect of Ice Age on development of agriculture. And also, this was like an old theory, but the passage is more about how development of agriculture caused the Ice Age. So it's the opposite way, okay, from A. So either way, A is a wrong answer. B, a theory about change in Earth climate cycle. Yeah, very vague, but maybe. A bit of a paraphrasing here, possibly. So a new theory is, so opposite to A, basically, okay, how humans' activity caused climate, okay, more broadly and specifically at the same time, how humans' actions, such as agricultural revolution, caused the interglacial period. Yeah, I like B. I think B is right. So this is how they make it a little bit more difficult, you know, paraphrase and make it a little bit more general and broad. So you really have to work out what each word means, okay? You have to work that out. They don't just give to you directly, okay? A theory is a new theory about a change in Earth's climate. So theory is human activity caused interglacial period to change. Yeah, so that's paraphrasing of B. So I think B is the answer. All right, let's check C. Let's check C and D. C, strategies to prevent Earth from entering another ice age. That's not the whole idea, nor we are not discussing let's not enter next ice age anymore. And these are things that we need to do. So that's C. So it's off topic. D, some effects on industrialization on Earth's atmosphere. This is definitely a minor. Just one part. Okay. So it doesn't cover the whole passage. So question 12, answer is B. Okay, moving right along, question 13. What does a professor imply about Earth's climate over last several million years? I mean, it doesn't explicitly says over last several million years, but it's divided into two sections, right? 11,000 years ago, so the latest interglacial period we are in right now, to now, that's one chunk. And the other interglacial period. So anytime before 11,000 years ago. Okay? And long time ago, millions of years ago. From 11,000 years ago to whenever. Okay? 400 million years ago. I'm just whatever. Okay? So what does professor imply about Earth's climate over last several million years? So several million years, it's an inference question, imply. So actual millions of years is not important. It's referring to the time longer than, older than 11,000 years ago. So not the latest current interglacial period, but all those times before that. Before the latest interglacial period, okay? So it follows the pattern, right? Only latest one doesn't follow the pattern. So if you follow the pattern, new interglacial period happened from ice age when carbon dioxide and methane gas are at its highest. So at its highest, peak means it's going to go down from there. And as it goes down, it stays warm for a little while, but eventually carbon dioxide and methane gas gradually continue to go down, and it enters a new ice age as it gradually cools down. Okay, so that's the normal pattern. So we're talking about normal pattern. Okay, ice ages have alternated with warmer periods. Yeah, because interglacial period, the definition is between ice age, right? So from very long time ago, we had ice age, interglacial period, ice age, interglacial period, ice age, interglacial period. So A looks right. We are looking for two answers, guys. Okay, it says click on two answers. One more. Recent ice ages. So this is already wrong because there is ice ages before and the latest ice age, no, it's ice age, not interglacial period, so maybe different, sorry. So recent ice ages, yeah, doesn't sound right because we don't go into recent ice ages, okay? But anyway, let's have a look. Recent ice ages have not been as cold as earlier. See, it's totally irrelevant. So recent 2, 3, 4 ice ages were warmer than earlier ice ages. We are not talking about actual temperatures of multiple ice ages at all, okay? Just the latest interglacial period, just one, okay? Not multiple. See, interglacial periods have become cooler, very similar to B, right? Okay, it's irrelevant. It's not mentioned this way at all. Okay, so plural already makes the answer very awkward. Okay, the previous interglacial periods, okay, were shorter than the current latest. Yeah, because pretty hard question. What is the interglacial period? In between ice ages, right? So I'll just write interglacial period like this, okay? And it continues, right? But the latest one does not follow the pattern. So this note-taking part tells us the answer, because usually it stays warm for a little while, but carbon dioxide, methane gas continue to decrease. It doesn't rise up again, the normal pattern, so that it gradually gets cooled down to enter the ice age. But what is the current one? So paraphrase of the latest is the current in this context. It does not follow the pattern. So it goes down a bit, carbon dioxide and methane, but it rises again, okay? And it says it prevented the ice age quite clearly here. So if we follow the pattern in 1970s, you know, it's supposed to gradually cool down. Temperature should get cooler to get ready to eventually enter the ice age, but it did not happen. It did not happen that way. Okay, so these two parts of our note-taking, this part and this part, okay, this part and this part, tell us D is the answer, okay? So current interglacial period is getting longer than previous interglacial period. This length is getting longer because we are not getting ready to enter the ice age because the temperature is not gradually getting cooler. It's not. Yeah, good question, I think. This. Okay, so question 13, pretty clear, right? Yeah. So question 13, the answer is D. Okay, let's continue. Yeah, I thought question 13 was a very good question. Let's move on to question 14. According to the professor, what factor, so what is extending, making it longer, extending the duration of current interglacial period, the increase in amount of carbon dioxide gas and methane gas, okay? Because that's the difference. So if we are not extending the duration of current interglacial period, like previous question, question 13, means we are following the normal pattern, okay? So one difference that the current interglacial period, paraphrase the latest interglacial period right now, is that carbon dioxide and methane rise up again rather than continue to fall like other and previous interglacial period. That's the big difference. So because carbon dioxide and methane gas rising again, it's making the differences, right? That's only one difference in outcome, okay? So let's have a look at the answer choices. A shift, change in the location of wetland and forest. It's not, yeah, they're trying to make it tricky. They're trying to get the wrong answer from you, okay? They're trying to make it a little tricky, a little difficult, technically on purpose, right? So it's not about changing location, okay? It's making more wetlands in number, amount of wetlands, and they are getting rid of forest, cutting down forest. So it's about less forest by cutting down and more wetlands by agriculture. It's very different from changing location, okay? So be careful. A little bit of trick, not too much. Yeah. B, the relatively, comparatively mild temperature of the most recent, what? This is never mentioned. It's not mentioned at all. It's totally irrelevant. Okay, C, the increased absorption, so absorbing, like receiving, accepting, okay? And it's increased absorption of certain atmospheric gases by farm crops. Increased absorption of certain atmospheric gases in the atmosphere, okay? Like, does it say certain farm crops, like, I don't know, like rice or wheat or whatever, okay? Whatever the crops, potato, corns. Does the passage say these crops specifically, okay? Because it says by farm crops, okay? So farm crops, yeah, so increased absorption of certain atmospheric gases by farm crops. So this certain atmospheric gases were absorbed by farm crops? No, it's produced more in the atmosphere, okay? So I guess it's a little tricky, but it's not absorbed, received by farm crops. It's ridiculous, okay? So these poor crops are like absorbing more carbon dioxide. These crops, no, okay? An increase in the quantity of certain gases. So yeah, amount of carbon dioxide and methane gases in the atmosphere. Okay, it exists in Earth. Okay, and it says in the atmosphere several times, more than twice, but I didn't bother writing down in the atmosphere because I understood more carbon dioxide and methane gases in the air, basically. Okay, so that's what D means. Okay, very clear, right? So question 14, D. All right, question 15. According to the professor, what activity is associated with the beginning of agriculture may have slowed or prevented the onset of predicted ice age? There are two things specifically, right? It's here. I said it was important information, right? When I was writing notes and explaining it to you, right? It's almost like a main body paragraph, right? So what possibly caused agricultural revolution to have an effect on climate? First, by raising crops, you may cut down forests. And if forests are not replaced, it increased the amount of quantity of CO2. Second, wetlands, increasing quantity of wetlands would create more methane gas, and certain crops by agriculture creates more man-made artificial wetlands. Means more wetlands, more methane gas. So these two, okay? And it's click two answers. So clearing of trees, yeah, that's paraphrasing of cutting down the forests. And burning of fossil fuel, not answering the question. Domestication of certain animals, yeah, it doesn't say specifically which animals, horse, cow, I don't know, doesn't say. Cultivation of certain grains, so that's here, okay? Certain crops by agriculture creates more artificial wetland. Or you can listen to that part again in the listening passage to make sure, right? But you will find it. And that's why I wrote agriculture here to, paraphrase this part, okay? By agriculture, by raising certain crops, it creates more artificial wetlands, okay? Yeah. Told you, question 15. So question 15 answer is A and D, coming from this paragraph in listening passage by our note-taking. Okay, let's continue. Question 16. What is the professor's attitude towards industrialization? It creates more carbon dioxide and it potentially have a big effect on climate because industrialization would increase the quantity of CO2. And from previous paragraphs, we know increased quantity of CO2 will have an effect on climate, okay? Make it different from, like natural previous conditions, okay? It lengthens the interglacial period. Okay, A, he thinks that its effect, the industrialization's effect on Earth climate will decrease over time. He doesn't say that. He doesn't say industrialization that creates more carbon dioxide will decrease in the future. He doesn't say that. Like in the future, we don't know. But currently, or in the past, industrialization created a lot of carbon dioxide. That's what he says. So he does not say this at all. B, he's worried that it may speed the arrival of, it's a wrong inference, because if you create more carbon dioxide, that would delay the arrival of the next ice age. So it's actually opposite to potential answer, although it's very much over inference. But I mean, either way, it's a wrong answer. All right. Okay, C. He thinks that it may reduce the effects of agriculture on Earth's climate. I mean, it's almost same as A. He doesn't say the effects of agriculture may be reduced. He does not say that at all. He says, in the past and now, a lot of CO2. In the future, not sure what's going to happen. So C, very much similar to A if you want to analyze. It's wrong, and also it's kind of like opposite direction to the answer that we're looking for. He's unsure. Yeah, he says he doesn't know. Right, let's look at the notes. In the future, it's tricky, right? Like we are in the new era, new era, new time, new terrain. So what's going to happen in the future? What would this bring to the future for us? We don't know. Okay, so unsure here is very clear and keyword. So he's not sure. He doesn't know about long-term effects. So it's a paraphrase of what's going to happen from now to the future. In this context, it's paraphrased to long-term effects. Okay. Yeah. So question 16, the answer is D. All right, let's finish on a high. Last question for this section. This is a listening question, very short. So listen carefully, and then we'll try to pick the right answer. Here we go.
What does the professor imply when he says this?
In fact, back in the 1970s, a lot of theorists were predicting that, the climate would start to cool and we'd slowly enter into a new ice age. And then they were puzzled as to why it didn't seem to be happening.
Okay, so what does professor imply when professor says, it's this part here in our note-taking, right? Okay, this part here. So in 1970s, a lot of experts, theorists, okay, predicted that it's going to cool down to eventually, slowly, go towards the ice age. But why is that not happening right now? Okay, so what does professor imply? Okay, theorists sometimes make careless prediction. How is it careless? Okay, like what ground can you say, oh, that's just careless, that's ridiculous, that's dumb prediction without any evidence? How can you say that, right? Okay, B, theorists were unaware of some of the facts of human activity. Yeah, it's possible inference, okay? So theorists were maybe unaware what cutting down trees and making more wetlands or agricultural revolution would bring to the climate, right? Okay, they were unaware. If they were aware, they could possibly, I don't know, I'm just making this up, but logically, if they were aware what effect, what outcome would human activity would bring, then maybe they, would have guessed right. But because they were unaware, they didn't understand, they had no idea, they didn't know what human activities effects would be on environment, so their prediction came out to be wrong. So I think B is very strong possible answer. C, technology of the 70s was not sophisticated enough. I mean, just not mentioned at all. Irrelevant. Okay, we are not imagining it. The answer should not be based on your imagination. It should be based on comprehension of English. So C is easy, no. D, scientists in the 70s overestimated the speed at which Ice Age progressed. What does D even mean? Okay, scientists in the 70s. So theorists, maybe scientists as well, overestimated, okay, the speed. So they thought the speed, so it would go faster, which Ice Age progresses. It's irrelevant once again. Not answering the question. Because question is almost asking why. Why would they do that? What does it say to us that, for the scientists to guess wrong? Okay. I mean, D just doesn't make any sense, right? Scientists overestimated speed. So they thought Ice Age progresses really fast. Okay. This is wrong in so many ways, but I'm not going to waste your time. But I want to be clear and explain to you. Maybe overestimated the speed of interglacial period makes at least kind of logical sense a bit. But how can they overestimate the Ice Age progression speed? It's interglacial period progression, not Ice Age progression. So it's just totally wrong and irrelevant to the question and the contents of the passage. There you have it. I'm blabbing on, so I'll wrap up because I think it's clear, right? So question 17, the answer is, as I explained, B. Yeah, I mean, they were unaware, they didn't know, they didn't understand, they did not, so that they could not guess right. They guessed wrong. Why? Because they could not, they were not aware of it. They didn't know. They didn't get it. Okay, that's it. Sorry if I repeated myself, although you understood already. I just wanted to make sure that my explanation was super clear. Okay, that's another session done. So I'll see you again in the next video. Thank you for watching. I really appreciate it. Let's keep going and see you soon. Bye. Hi everyone, this is James Song here. We're doing another listening passage today. We're doing a conversation passage, so hopefully it will be a little shorter and easier than the other lecture passages. Okay, so without further ado, let's get right into it. So I'll play the passage and I'll start by writing notes.
Listen to a conversation between a student and a professor.
Professor Jennings, I hope I'm not interrupting, but you wanted to see me?
Oh, hello, Suzanne. Yes, come right in. How are you doing?
All right.
Well, good. The reason I wanted to talk to you was that while you were presenting your linguistics project in class the other day, well, I was thinking you're a perfect candidate for the Dean's Undergraduate Research Fund.
Professor, I'm not really sure what the, dean's...
Undergraduate Research Fund is? It is a mouthful, I suppose. Okay, here's the thing. Every year, the school has a pool of money to fund a number of research projects of undergraduate students because, as you can imagine, in-depth research often requires monetary support.
I would like to expand on my research.
Good. First, a panel of professors reviews the applications for the grant, and then they decide on which research projects should be funded. The allotted money can be used for travel expenses, to attend a conference, for example, or for things like supplies, research equipment, resources that are necessary to conduct the research.
I see.
Right. And I think you should apply for this grant. Your project is definitely eligible, and you could expand it if you had the necessary resources. So, does it sound like something you'd be interested in?
Oh yeah, it sounds great. I thought the topic I worked on was really interesting, and it's certainly relevant to my linguistics major. I assume it would also look good when I try to get into graduate school. But how do I apply for the grant?
It's pretty straightforward. A brief description of your proposed project and an estimated budget, how much you'd need to spend and what you intend to spend it on. Also, a glowing letter of recommendation from a linguistics professor wouldn't hurt, which I'd be more than happy to write up for you.
Okay, cool. I'm pretty clear on how to carry out my project, but I'm not sure where I can find more information on the subject.
Well, I've already thought of that. There's this private library at a university in Boston. By the way, because I graduated from that school, I can get you access to it, no problem. You see, the library houses lots of unpublished documents that are relevant to your topic.
So I could put that in the application for the grant, that I plan on using material from that library for my research, and figure a trip to Boston into my budget?
Exactly. I really think, judging from your work in class and the relevance and clarity of this project, you'd really have a good chance of getting the funding.
Okay, I'll definitely apply then.
Well, the sooner the better. It's due in a few weeks. Good luck, and I'll get that letter written up right away.
Okay, so how much did you get that? I hope you got it all, or at least most of it, most of them. All right, so let's go through. So left side is student and right side is the lecturer, professor. And you cannot write everything down, okay? So sometimes if the answer of the question is enough, I would just write the answer only, or some parts would be skipped if I think I can remember because I understand the passage really well, then I wouldn't bother write it down. And really minor details also, I wouldn't write it down. Okay, so students come to the professor but says, did you want to see me? I wrote this down because it's important whether students approach the professor by students' will, or although students come to the professor's office, some situations, the students are asked to come by the professor. So initiator of this conversation is professor, although student came to the professor's office, right? So I wanted to make this clear. So professor wanted to see this female student. So female students came, right? And professor basically say, I think you're perfect candidate for Dean's undergrad research fund. And say what? And professor explains, right? The school every year have some money to fund the research project for undergraduate student because in-depth research need monetary support. Okay, monetary means money. So yeah, the students say, yeah, I want to expand my research if possible. Why not, right? So professor explains, professors, panel of professors, not this professors, number of lecturers, review the application and they choose which project to fund, to give money for travel expenses, attending conferences, supplies, any kind of money that is necessary for research project, they will give money for, right? And, professor really strongly believe that this student should apply, okay, to this research fund that is available for undergraduate students. Yeah. And, professor says the project is eligible, so she should apply, and this will help her expand her research, right? And she says yes, basically accepting, I will apply. So yeah, there's some reasons for that. She thought the topic was interesting, and she believes it's relevant to her major. And also, getting this funding would look good on her graduate application. So she is already thinking about going to grad school, to maybe master's degree after graduating her undergraduate degree, which is a bachelor degree. So yeah, so she's attracted to this opportunity for these 3 reasons. And she asked how to apply. And I didn't bother writing it down because I would remember. So professor explains to her, you need to give brief description of your research. So I guess you need to write that down in your application. And budget, money, how much and where to spend it. Okay, how much money she needs and on what she will spend it on. And the professor is really keen, right? Really likes these students and want this student to apply for this funding, right? Because professor, without students even asking for it, professor volunteers that he will write a recommendation letter for her in the application process, okay? So this is how to apply. And she says she knows what to do, but kind of she doesn't know where to find information to do in-depth research. And professor already thought of this, how thoughtful this teacher is. He says there is a private library in Boston, and because he graduated from there, so he can give her access to that library. So I guess, they are not in Boston. It's a bit far away, but she can go there and professor can give her the access to get into the library. And professor says there are a lot of relevant information to her topic of research, even some unpublished work, right? So a lot of information there for her. So that's where to find the information for her, this private library that he knows, that professor knows, in Boston, right? So students kind of getting the purpose of this. So, students ask a question, but that's a rhetorical question, asking questions to confirm whether she understood, right? So student says, so maybe I should, write the trip to Boston, possibly, and plan to go to this library in Boston into her application to get funding, because, she would need money to travel to Boston. And if you actually go up a little bit, Professor mentioned this funding can be used, for example, travel expenses, attending conferences or supplies, or any necessary money, funding to conduct the research, right? So later on, we just covered it. We just covered now that, you know, she's saying, oh, so if I need to go to Boston, maybe I can apply to this research fund, and if I get it, then they can cover me. They can, you know, the money that I receive can be used to pay for her travel expenses to Boston for her research, to visit this library in Boston. Okay. Yeah. And Professor, once again, probably says it for the third time. He thinks she has good chance to get this funding. And she'll say, you know, she says she'll apply. And, you know, Professor reminds her to apply it pretty soon because it's due in a few weeks. And he says he will start writing recommendation letter. So yeah, what a great mentor, what a great professor, trying to give more opportunities to his student. Okay, so let's look at the questions. Okay, why does the professor want to talk to the students? So it says here, right? The professor wants to let her know there is a thing called Dean's undergrad research funding available, and the professor wants this student to apply for this funding, right? That's the reason why professor asked her to see him, right? So let's look at answer choices. A, to discuss her application to graduate school. Nope, it's nothing to do with graduate school. She wants to go someday, maybe, right? Yeah. B, to discuss a possible internship. It's not an internship. Try to let her know about the research fund and ask her to apply for it, right? C, to encourage her to increase the scope of a research project. Yeah, maybe, in a roundabout way, because if you want to expand your research, you need some money, funding, so that you need to apply to this research fund to get the money, get the funding to expand her research, right? So let's have a look, right? School gives funding for the research, and she says, I want to expand. You know, professor basically say, do you want to expand? You know, because if you want to expand your research, you need some monetary support if you want to expand it, right? So, you know, C is a little bit broad and general, but C looks pretty good as an answer, right? As the answer. Let's check D. Let's check D. Okay, let's check D. D, to suggest some changes to improve her research project. No. So at first sight, C looks a little bit different from letting her know about the research fund and ask her to apply for it. But in essence, C is exactly that, because in order to expand the research, professor believes she needs to apply to this research fund because he believes she can get it. Okay, so the answer is C. Question 18, C. Okay, question 19. According to the professor, what information should be included in student's application? So this is how school picks the right candidate. And she asks how to apply. And this, as I explained, was how to apply, the process of student's application. She needs to give brief description of the research and apply by putting in the budget, how much money, and on what and where, okay, on what she's going to spend it on, and maybe a recommendation letter by the professor, okay? All right, so let's solve this question. What information should be included in student's application to apply for this funding? The amount of money she will need for a project, yeah. It's right here. And yeah, budget. And it says how much, right? B, the amount of time she'll need to complete a project, not mentioned. Summary of research already conducted on the topic. Already? Like already is already same as brief description of the research project? No. Brief description could be future, based on future driven. Okay, so I want to do this research. Please help me by giving me some money. Okay, but C is saying summary of research already conducted. So C is saying if you chose C, you basically have chosen that saying this is the research I have done already. But there's no information here that you need to give that out. Okay, so not mentioned. The reasons why she chose that particular topic, not mentioned. Okay. Description means just, explaining what the research is. So just by looking at this, right, we don't know whether they were asking for the reasons because it just says brief description. So you just need to describe what the research is, right? And this is not automatically the reasons, right? So answer is A. Question 19, A. Okay, let's continue. Question 20. Why does the professor mention a university in Boston? Because he graduated from that university, so he can give access to this private library in Boston that Professor thinks she can use to get relevant information. Okay. All right. So professor graduated from this university so that professor can give student an access to that library that professor thinks she needs to go to get information. Okay, so that's in note-taking here, right? I graduated from that university, so I can give you access to that library, no problems, this part. He used to be a professor, no, graduated, so student. He thinks the student may find useful material there. Maybe. Because he graduated there, so he can give her the access. And why he thinks she should go there? Because in that library, he thinks she can get a lot of relevant information on her topic. So all of this, right? So B may be right. But let's check whether C or D is a better answer, more comprehensive answer, or actually B is the answer. Let's find out. He has plans to visit university soon. Nope. D, he thinks the student should attend the conference there. So, you know, ACD, awful answers, right? All off topic or irrelevant, all completely wrong. So the answer comes from this part of the note taking, right? So answer is B. So question 20, B. Question 21. What does the professor say? So what does he say he will do for the student? Write a recommendation letter. Okay. So he just volunteers ever before or without student asking for one. Okay. Professor volunteers, recommendation by a linguistic professor, who is him, wouldn't hurt, right? So that's question 21. All right, A, helper determine details for research budget. Not mentioned. A sister with graduate school inquiry, irrelevant. Talk to her about ways to expanding her project. Yeah, maybe, but it's not something that he says he will do for her. Okay, it's different talking about it opposed to, yeah, this is what I'll do for you. I will do this for you. That is, write a recommendation letter. Okay, so answer is D. Question 21, D. Okay, last question of this conversation listening passage. Question 22. Why does the professor say this? So we need to listen to the audio file. Let's go.
Why does the professor say this?
It is a mouthful, I suppose.
Yeah, it goes way back in the beginning. He says, I think you're a perfect candidate for Dean's undergraduate research fund. And the student says, what? Like, students doesn't even get it. Like, what? Sorry, what did you say? What are you talking about? Okay. And professor says, yeah, it's a mouthful, I guess. I don't usually do this, but let's listen to it again, because I'll discuss, even if you don't catch it here when it was played, just by listening to the question here, let's discuss how to get to the right answer, okay?
Why does the professor say this?
It is a mouthful, I suppose.
So let's assume that you didn't connect it to this part, okay? Just by listening, it is mouthful, I suppose, means it's hard to pronounce, right? It's mouthful, difficult to say, okay, or long, or really difficult to pronounce physically, technically, right? So just based on that, we can still get to the right answer. That's what I wanted to show you. If you got to where it was said in the passage because your listening is so good, or when you're doing note-taking, you're sharp and you remember, that's great. But the purpose of this question is you should still be able to get the right answer by just listening to that sentence and understanding that sentence to get to the right answer, right? It's a mouthful, I suppose. So it's, very long or difficult to say, pronounce. He thinks the fund is rather limited. Nope. I mean, mouthful. you know. He agrees that Fun's name is rather long or difficult to pronounce, or yeah, exactly, right? C, he thinks the student needs help with her project. Huh? In what way? Not answering the question. So broad. It's mathful, I suppose. Okay, so mathful. Need what kind of help when it's mathful to say? Totally irrelevant answer. D, he is surprised that the student is not familiar with the fun. Wrong meaning, okay? It's mouthful, I suppose. If you chose D, basically you're saying, professor is saying like, I can't believe you haven't heard of this fund before. You should know, you should be aware of this fund, but you're not? Really? That's D, right? So it has nothing to do with something that is mathful, because it's very literal, it's very technical, you know, it's very long or something difficult to say. So D is wrong. So clearly, question 22, answer is B. So another conversational passage done. Question 22, the answer is B. Hello, everyone. This is James Song here. Nice to see you again. Welcome to this video. So we have another listening lecture today, listening lesson, and it's a lecture passage. So let's get started right away. So I'll play the listening file, listening passage, and start writing notes first. Okay, here we go.
Listen to part of a lecture in a literature class.
All right, so now we've talked about folk legends and seen that one of their key features is there's usually some real history behind them. They're often about real people, so you can identify with the characters, and that's what engages us in them. The particular stories might not be true, and some of the characters or events might be made up, but there's still a sense that the story could have been true since it's about a real person. That's a distinct contrast from the other main branch of popular storytelling, which is folk tales. Folk tales are imaginative stories that, like folk legends, they've been passed down orally from storyteller to storyteller since ancient times. But with folk tales, you don't ever really get the sense that the story might have been true. They're purely imaginative and so quite revealing, I think anyway, about the culture and the connection between folk tales and the culture, which we'll talk about. But first, let's go over the various types of folk tale and focus specifically on Norwegian folk tales since they illustrate the variety pretty well. There are, in general, three main types of Norwegian folk tales. One is animal stories, where animals are the main characters. They can be wild animals or domestic, and a lot of times they can talk and behave like humans, but at the same time, they retain their animal characteristics too. They tend to involve animals like bears, wolves, and foxes. The point of these stories, their internal objective, so to speak, is usually to explain some feature of the animal, how it arose. So there's one about a fox who fools a bear into going ice fishing with his tail. When the bear puts his tail into the water through a hole in the ice to try and catch a fish, the ice freezes around it, and he ends up pulling his tail off. So that's why bears to this day have such short tails. The second category of Norwegian folktale is the supernatural. Stories about giants and dragons and trolls, and humans with supernatural powers or gifts, like invisibility cloaks, or where people are turned into animals and back again into a person. Those are called transformation stories. There's a well-known Norwegian supernatural folktale, a transformation story called East of the Sun and West of the Moon, which we'll read. It involves a prince who's a white bear by night and a human by day, and he lives in a castle that's east of the sun and west of the moon, which the heroine in the story has to try to find. Besides being a good example of a transformation story, this one also has a lot of the common things that tend to show up in folk tales. You'll find the standard opening, Once Upon a Time, and it has stock characters like a prince and a poor but beautiful peasant girl. She's the heroine I mentioned. And it has a very conventional form, so no more than 2 characters are involved in any one scene. And it has a happy ending. And the story is presented as though, well, even though a lot of the actions that occur are pretty fantastic, so you'd never think of it as realistic, the characters still act like they resemble real people. They're not real, or even based on historical figures, but you might have a supernatural story involving a king, and he'd act like you'd expect a Norwegian king to act. Okay, the third main kind of folktale is the comical story. We'll say more later about these, but for now, just be aware of the category and that they can contain supernatural aspects, but they're usually more playful and amusing overall than supernatural stories. Now, as I said, traditionally folktales were just passed down orally. Each generation of storytellers had their own style of telling a story. But in Norway, before the 19th century, folktales were just for kids. They weren't seen as worthy of analysis or academic attention. But this changed when the Romantic movement spread throughout Europe in the mid-19th century. The Romantics looked at folktales as sort of a reflection of the soul of the people, so there was something distinctly Norwegian in folktales from Norway. And there was renewed pride in the literature and art forms of individual countries. As a result, the first collection of Norwegian folktales was published in 1852, and there have been many new editions published since then. For the people of Norway, these stories are now an important part of what it means to be Norwegian.
Okay, how much did you get it? I'm pretty confident, again, about the notes I have written. So I will go through the notes with you, line by line, word for word, and that will pretty much cover the whole passage in full, as a whole, I'm sure, okay? So the professor starts the lecture by talking about folk legend. So it's type of literature, okay? And it's based on history and it's about real people. So some story may not be true, but you know, some other part of the story could be true because it's based on real people and it's based on history. So folk tale is very different compared to folk legend in that way. It's in contrast, the listening says. It's complete contrast because it's not based on history. It's not based on real people. So it's purely imagined story that passed down orally from ancient times, from long time ago. And yeah, although it's not real, the professor says it shows about the culture of the country. So in professor's opinion, you know, you can see culture through folk tales, right? So in this passage, we're going to focus on Norwegian folk tales, Norway, okay? So one specific country's folk tale. I guess to see what kind of culture the country, the Norway, has through folk tales, I guess. So there are 3 types of folk tales. Norway folk tales, Norwegian folk tales, okay? The first one is based on animals, right? It could be wild or domestic. And in folk tales, the animal type the character can act like human and animal at the same time, simultaneously. So could be bear, wolf, fox, these kind of animals that act like humans and act like animal at the same time. So the point, like objective goal of this type is to show the feature of animal. So for example, fox took bear to ice fishing, and bear put the tails in the freezing water, and tails came off from the bears. Okay. Yeah, imaginatory story, obviously. Imagined story. Probably not true. And this is why bears have short tails. So that's first type. Okay, animal type. And it shows the feature of the animal. How did they get that feature? So for bears, they put tails in freezing water and tails came off. So that's why they got the short tails. Okay, pretty cute, I think. The second type of the Norwegian folktale, Norway folktale, is the supernatural theme. Okay, so definitely not realistic. Okay, supernatural. So it could be about giant or humans having incredible power, like being invisible, people cannot see, for example, or like a human transformed to animal and back and forth and come back to the humans, become animals again, and becomes humans again. That kind of supernatural theme story, okay? And you don't have to remember exact title. I think it was like East of Sun and West of the Moon or something like that. It was title of this second type of story, supernatural theme. And yeah, you have to know what you have written. So it's basically Prince, who is bear, animal by night, and humans by day. Okay, so this story is an example of human to animal and animal to human, back and forth, vice versa, transformation story as an example. Okay, and the professor said it has a lot of like traditional original style. Like it starts with once upon a time in the beginning of the story. It has a prince, and it has a beautiful poor girl as main character, one of the main characters. So it's a very traditional, typical of folktale, right? And it's very conventional, like only two characters in one scene. Okay, it's not very different from traditional way of storytelling. Okay, and it has a typical happy ending. All right, so the beautiful poor girl marries a charming prince. Okay, Cinderella stories, right? But it's a second type based on supernatural theme, the main character transforming from human to animal and animal to humans. Okay, and quite an important detail here. It's a detail, but I noticed the importance when I was listening to it because it was a very distinct information. It said when it was describing second type, supernatural type, that it's a very fantastic events, like many stories based on fantasy, but so it's not real. It's not based on history. It's not based on real people. It's not, okay? So that's folk legend, right? Folk tales, very different from folk legend in that regard, okay? It's not based on history. It is not based on real people. It's a purely fiction. It's made up story, but it reveals the country's culture. Okay, why? Because although it's not based on real people, in the story, they act like a real people, although it's not based on real people. Okay, so I thought it was quite a distinct information that I need to, you know, notice. You know, potentially questions may be asked based on this detail, right? So it even gives a further example, although we all understood, like, you know, king in this folktale story, although it's not based on real king in history, it's just a fiction, made up character, not a real king, but in the story, it may act like a real king, okay? So it's not real, but it may try to act like the real thing. Okay, so third type, remember we had 3 types of folktales. It's a comical type. And it quickly said, professor in the lecture said, we'll discuss this later, all right? So there may be a very technical, detailed question. It's a question type that ETS often, you know, use. So in the question, they may ask something about, you know, what did professor say about the third type, okay? And the answer may be, you know, you may get more information later. Or even the question may ask, what information could professor discuss after the end of the listening passage? Then answer may be, he will discuss comical type in more detail. You know, it's a very typical and technical tip. So if the lecturer says something about, oh, we'll discuss that later in detail, then, you know, be sure to keep that in mind just in case, because it's, you know, one technique that ETS often use to ask question. All right. Okay, so let's continue. So third type, comical. Professor said we'll discuss more in later, so just keep in mind there is a comical type, okay? And it's usually more amusing than the second type, supernatural type. I mean, the name says comical, so probably, it's more funny, okay? And the story is just passed down orally, as we know. So it has its own style. So this is next paragraph. So almost like a conclusion paragraph, okay? It's not purely describing about the third type. So the folk tale as a whole, just passed down orally, as already mentioned above here. So it has its own style, because I guess each individual, as it passes down, something gets added or taken out, or it's slightly changed. Before 19th century, the folktale was only for kids. Okay, they didn't see any other value than just to entertain the kids, right? But it changed. Yeah, so my triangle sign is being changed or changed when Romantic movement started mid-19th century. Okay, and Romantic movement felt that it shows the soul of the people, these stories, right? So revealing culture, okay, as professor said, it kind of matches how earlier in the passage the professor said, folk tales kind of reveal the culture of the country, of the place. And later on, Romantic movement, felt that, folk tales kind of shows the soul of people, soul of Norway people, Norwegians. So increase in pride in these stories led to first published work. So folktale was published for people to read in 1852. That was very first time. And new and other publications follow after that. So, Norwegian folktales, Norway people, Norwegian, are proud about their own folktales, right? So now it's not just for kids. Now the folktales is important part of being Norwegian. It shows their identity. So according to the professor, what professor said in the beginning was right, that it shows the culture of Norwegian, right? So they're very proud about it and proud of it. And folktales are important part of being a Norwegian. Okay. Yeah. So that's pretty comprehensive. I think we got all the necessary information we need to answer any kind of questions that may come our way. So let's look at the questions and get them right. All right, so let's look at the questions. Question 23. What is the lecture mainly about? Okay, A, the role played by folktales in contemporary, modern Norwegian society. Not really. It's not about what function, what role folktale plays in modern Norway. It's more about the overview of the folktales. Okay, so it's not really what role it plays in modern, current, present Norwegian society. Not really. The description, okay, of the major types, 3 types of Norwegian folktales. Yeah, it's basically a description. It's an overview, this passage, right? Overview of Norwegian folktales, right? The 3 broad types of Norwegian folktales as whole, right? So B looks really good. C, comparison of Norwegian folktales and Norwegian folk legend. Folk legend was just mentioned, and not even Norwegian, but folktale as a whole was briefly mentioned in the beginning, but it doesn't talk about folk legend after like first 2 sentences, right? It's all about folktales and specifically Norwegian folktales. So there is no comparison in this listening passage between folktales and folk legend as the whole passage. Definitely not. It's just first couple of sentences. So that this comparison is not what the this listening passage is mainly about as a whole. Definitely not. Okay, D, illustration of the differences between oral literature and written literature. Totally off topic. Okay. It's not, if you chose D, I'm sure you haven't, but if you chose D, that you're basically saying the whole passage is about comparison between oral literature versus written literature. Nonsense. So question 23, the answer is B. All right, moving right along, question 24. What does the professor find appealing, so attractive, okay, appealing, attractive about folk legend, not folk tales, folk legends. So what were the features of folk legend? It's based on history. It's based on real people. So people may identify and get engaged because some parts of the story may not be true, but other parts could be actually true because it's about real people and it's based on history. So people expect some of the story may be actually true about real people. So that's a real appeal about folk legend, not folk tales, folk legend, right? They're very imaginative, opposite of the answer. They are somewhat realistic. It's, you know, like a perfect paraphrase of this note-taking here, okay? Some part may not be true, but people may feel that the story could have been true because it's based on real people. So, you know, some parts may be untrue, but, you know, overall, so somewhat, not completely, not 100%. So somewhat includes this part saying that, you know, some part may be untrue is covered by somewhat, okay? So they are somewhat realistic. So they expect it could have been true, okay, overall. So that's a real appeal. C, they stress what is important in a culture. Not true. I mean, C is completely wrong, but, you know, not exactly same as C, but about revealing culture in this passage is folk tales, not folk legend. And question is asking about folk legend. So C is completely wrong answer choice. D, they show similarity. So there's no comparison here, I don't think, about folk legend. Just this is what's appealing. They show, so folk legends show similarity between otherwise diverse society, not mentioned at all. Right? So we don't know why even D is there. Okay, we don't get it. So B is the answer, and it comes from this part of note-taking precisely. Okay, it matches perfectly. It's basically the same sentence. So question 24, the answer is B. Okay, next question, question 25. How is the story of the bear and the fox characteristics of Norwegian animal stories? So this is from this part right here, right? Okay, so first type, the animal type that shows the feature of the animals, okay? And the story of bear and fox is this part here, okay? Fox takes the bear to ice fishing, and bear put his tail in the freezing ice cold water, and the tails gets cut off in the freezing water. So that's why bears got to have the short tail. Okay, so let's answer the question. How is the story of bear and fox characteristics of Norwegian animal stories? So probably this is the answer. Okay, the purpose, point. So the purpose, the point of the animal type folktale is to tell how the feature of the animal came about. How did it happen? That's the point. That's the purpose of this type. Okay. A, it explains the origin, so how it came about originally. Okay. Origin of a physical characteristics of animals. So physical characteristics here we can paraphrase as feature or features, okay? Or physical characteristic can be paraphrased as the features as well, okay? So origin. So how the physical characteristics or characteristics of animal has come about. Okay. So has come about can be paraphrased as origin. So A looks pretty good, right? B, it uses animal behavior, so bears, putting his tails in the water and cutting the tails off. So it uses animal behavior, bears' behavior, to explain human characteristics. No. So basically, this is the answer. Right? C, it shows how animals were domesticated by people. How bears were raised by people. Okay. D, so C is not the right answer, as you know. D, it contains episodes of animal changing into people. This is supernatural theme, right? So that's the second type of folktale. So it doesn't answer this question, because the question is purely asking you to answer this part. And objective of this story as an example is to show how the feature of animal came about. Okay. So question 25, the answer is A. Okay, question 26. Why does the professor mention, okay, a folktale called East of the Sun and West of the Moon? So that is to exemplify, give supporting details to explain supernatural theme folktale, which was a second type of Norwegian folktale, and to, as you can see in the note, I don't have to remember it all, to provide a story that explains supernatural theme story, which could be a story about giant or humans with incredible power, such as, or humans transforming to animal and back to humans again. So this story matches transformation story, right? Because it said Prince, who is bear animal by night, at night, and transformed to human during the day. Okay. So let's look for the right answer. It's choose two type of question. Okay. To point out conventions found in most folktales. Because this part from Once Upon a Time. So if you remember, and I actually told you this when I was reviewing my notes. So from here, the professor say it's very typical, you know, beginning is very typical, like other traditional folktales. It starts with Once Upon a Time, and it's very typical. You know, main characters include Prince and a beautiful poor girl, right, as a main characters. And also it says it's very conventional, traditional, like having only two characters in one scene, you know, not more than two characters in one scene. And it has a happy ending. So these two lines we have written as our notes matches A as the correct answer exactly. So we need to choose one more. B, to point out differences between animal stories and comical stories. Definitely not. We are just within one type. Okay. One type of stories, no comparison between different types. C, to give an example of, 100%. Okay, I explained this several times, right? They claimed supernatural stories, for example, like humans to animal transformation stories. For example, East of the Sun, West of the Moon is such story as an example. And the story goes like blah, 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 blah. So C is perfect. D, to give an example of a story published in first collection, we don't know which stories. It doesn't say East of the Sun and West of the Moon. This titled story, folktale, was included in the first collection of Norwegian folktales. We just don't know because professor doesn't say anything about it, right? So choose two answers. Question 26. Answers are A and C. Okay, question 27, next question. What does professor say about the characters in Norwegian folktales? Okay. A, they usually behave in playful and amusing ways. This is just about comical type, right? In comical type, third type is more in comparison, usually more amusing than the second type, which was supernatural theme. So A does not answer this question because question is saying, what does professor say about the characters in folktales, right? So A is not the answer. B, characters, they usually behave the way that real Norwegian people behave. Maybe. So I told you this, right? It felt like important detail. It wasn't the main idea, it was a detail, but you know, this part right here, it felt like the important detail because of this, I guess it really shows the culture of Norway. Okay, so it's fantastic stories, it's made up stories, it's based on imagination, imaginatory stories. However, although it's not based on real person, they act like the real people, although it's not real. Okay, so of course, we are not talking about actual specific Norwegian king, but a king, the king in this folktale stories, at least try to act like a real king. Although we know it's not based on history or talking about the real king, in the story, the king act like the real thing. So I think B is the answer. B is saying exactly that. C, most are giants, trolls, dragons. D, most are based on, this is exactly opposite. Okay, they are not based on histories. Okay, and C is only talking about supernatural theme, so it does not answer the question either, right? So 27, answer is B, and it came out from this part of the note-taking precisely, okay? So this part is answered, used to answer this question, and exactly the same as answer choice B. So question 27, B. All right, we have made it to the last question of this section, this listening passage set. So let's go. Question 28. What does the professor imply? So inference question. Happened as a result of romantic movement. Okay, so it's this part here. Before romantic movement. So romantic movement changed all that. What has romantic movement changed? Before 19th century, so until the end of 18th century, the folk tales were only for kids. Okay, they didn't see any other values of the folk tale. It was just for kids' entertainment. But by mid 19th century, Romantic movement changed all that. Okay, and it put a lot of pride in the Norwegian people about these stories, these folk tales. So it ended up being published, okay, in 1852. Okay. All right, so children's literature became less popular. No. So Romantic movement spreading to Norway resulted in what? Attempts were made to modernize the plot. No. If you choose B, you're basically saying Romantic movement led Norwegian to modernize, change and modernize the story. Okay, makes no sense. Not mentioned. C. Folktales began to be regarded as an important aspect of Norwegian culture. This part here. Okay, so before it was only for kids, but Romantic movement changed all that. It was published and it put pride in Norwegian people. And finally, folktale became important part of being Norwegian. And what was the first point, the trigger point that changed all that? Romantic movement, as we have written in our note-taking. Okay, so Romantic movement changed all that, okay, led to this outcome. So C looks as the perfect answer. D, folktales in Norway became more similar to folktales from other parts of Europe. You know, I want to know, you know, I mean, folktales from or of other European country is not even mentioned, not even one. So I want to know, but there is no information in this listening passage. Okay, so it's done now. Last question of this passage, question 28. The answer is C.